could be a long night.
Yeah, and I bet you, especially
Did I get my
since a month ago.
script? Where's my script?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I seem to have my script. I'll do it. Okay. Okay, we have now moved to the action portion of the agenda. Item number 1, amending policy number 2415, high school graduation requirements.
Good evening. My name is Caleb Perkins.
Oh, hold on a second.
Excuse
We're
me.
going to start with the motion, the second, and then we're going to hear from the committee member, and then you're on. So stick around.
I move that the school board amend board policy number 2415, high school graduation requirements, as attached to the board action report.
I second the motion.
Okay, so our CNI chair is not here, but who can speak? Director Geary, can you speak for
I can.
this and the next item, actually?
So both item number 1 and 2 came to CNI on October 11th and were both passed through for consideration.
Okay, thank you. All right, now over to you, Caleb.
Thank you. Good evening, directors. Thank you for the opportunity to raise 2 items related to our secondary revisioning work and ongoing work to get ready for the 24 credits. This first board action report, 2415, asks for your a vote on the removal of the 2.0 GPA requirement. We all support rigor. We believe, however, this requirement is no longer necessary or helpful. And I reference the testimony, the powerful testimony from Principal Weinkoop from Ballard High School, and the powerful testimony from academic dean Chris McBride from Garfield High School, who has joined us again on the need to make this change. It also echoes what the 24 Credit Task Force report recommended initially. There's been no change in the board action report since the initiation and since the introduction on November 1st, and we're open to your questions.
Are there any questions or comments about this item? Okay, well, then I have a few. Because we are heading towards a vote on this, I just want to make sure that we're clear on a couple of aspects of this. And so, so this is the request that we eliminate the 2.0 GPA as a requirement, as a high school graduation requirement. Currently, you can tell me if I've got this right, we're one of only 2 districts in the state that
correct.
have a GPA requirement.
That's correct.
There are numerous other things that students have to do to have to accomplish in order to graduate from high school. So the GPA was just one of them. And is it possible for a student to get beyond a 2.0 in their core subjects, but not get it in their electives, and therefore not be able to? Could you just speak a little bit to why this is an issue, just to refresh people's memories on this?
I will. I will, and I'll also invite Ms. McBride if there's additional details that you appreciate. Yes, there are a number of ways in which the GPA is calculated, and for the purposes of this requirement, there are certainly scenarios where students can do well in core classes and not well in electives, and vice versa. There's any number of scenarios that I think lead to an inconsistent approach that ultimately makes this this bar somewhat arbitrary or mainly arbitrary, and as a result, that's one of the reasons why we're asking for its removal, and that's why the 24 Credit Task Force asked for its removal. That, again, the number of things that can happen that make this bar not a consistent one.
Mm-hmm. And a 2.0 is a C, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And I think one of the more compelling points that was brought up by Ms. McBride before was the fact that a D is a passing grade, and so students pass with a D, and yet that's not good enough for them to have a diploma. And so there seems to be an inconsistency in what we're doing. So one of my concerns would be, and I mean, I am leaning towards supporting this, is the question is going to be, are we lowering our standards? And you've made enough compelling points to say no. You know, we're still expecting a lot of our students, just we're not going to let this one thing hold them back. Would it be possible to ask you all to come back to us in about a year and tell us what the ramifications have been of this decision if we go ahead and do this? In other words, what did it change? What did the change look like, so that we can feel that be sure we're on the right path?
That sounds both healthy and reasonable, yes.
Okay. Is that something that we would need to have to put in this bar as like an amended sentence? I guess I'm looking at legal counsel on that one.
Noel Tree, General Counsel, and I'm sorry, I missed the question that you were
Okay,
asking.
what I'm suggesting is, I'm asking staff if they can, if we go ahead and if this does pass, if we can ask staff to come back to the board every year, or at least the first year, and report back on what the results have been and what the implications have been of this change, so we can know what has happened and whether it's going in the right direction or not. And if it looks like staff is willing to do this, but should we have it stated as a sentence in the bar? Does that require like an amendment?
It wouldn't work. You wouldn't be required to put that in the bar. I mean, if staff's committed to do that and you're comfortable with that commitment, then that would be sufficient.
Okay. Director Geary.
Can anybody think of a report that is already given to us that this piece could be included in as a data point, so it becomes a natural fit in terms of not redirecting work specifically at an off time, but just an additional piece of information that is included in terms of perhaps achievement, graduation rates, and just adding that gap in so that we can look at it in a greater context as well, which I think would be ultimately helpful.
Michael Tolley, Associate Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. I currently can't think of an annual report that comes to the board that would reflect the specifics of this particular item. Of course, we do have annual reports to the board on graduation rates and other data points that, of course, that was presented last week. I was looking at the language of the policy itself to see if there was anything that might reflect that, and it doesn't contain that. However, we could include an expectation that as part of the superintendent procedure, which is the counseling manual that guides us for this particular board policy, that would be an additional annual report would be given to the C&I Policy Committee, if you will.
Okay, so how would we make that happen? Is that something we would have to put on the C&I agenda, or who
Yes,
could make that happen?
We can make that part of the C&I Policy Committee work plan and incorporate that into that process.
Okay, so is that something that that Associate Superintendent Tully, you could
Yes.
make happen?
Yes, I'll
All right.
follow up on that.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other questions or comments about this item? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Scheck, the roll call, please.
Director Blanford,
Aye.
Director Geary, Director Harris,
Aye.
Director Patu, Director Pinkham,
Aye.
Director Peters.
Aye.
This motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you. So we now move on to item number 2, amending policy number 2420, high school grade and credit marking.
I move that the school board amend board policy number 2420, high school grade and credit marking, as attached to the board action report.
I second the motion.
Have there been any changes since this came to us in introduction?
Yes, thanks again for the opportunity to address another aspect of our 24 credit work. So per Director Burke's suggestion, to ensure that there's adequate language in the policy to ensure that a credit is defined clearly and with adequate rigor and checks, we added a fourth component per Director Geary's first suggestion at the October 11th work session to define a credit. The fourth aspect of the definition now has been added. It says successfully meeting the credit earning requirements specified in other existing policies. Superintendent Procedure 2024, Policy 2409, and Policy 2413. Again, that was per Director Burke's suggestion that we leverage all of the existing language around credit earning opportunities so that it's clear that all of these are linked together.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments about this item? Director Blanford?
I would just say that we can see it, the members of the community might not be able to see that there had been fairly rich community engagement on this, that we're not just making it in isolation, but we've gotten feedback from the task force and from community members so that we're making a decision that we believe is in the best interests of the district and the students that we're serving, but we're also collaborating with various stakeholders to ensure that that is the case.
Exactly.
Okay, Director Pinkham.
I believe I brought this up when this was first introduced. When it does list the grades, 11 grade marks, you know, A minus, B plus. Yeah, I don't see anything that says like the A is a 4 A minus is a 3.5, et cetera. I think this would help other people in the community that, hey, I'm not aware of this grading system. You know, where I came from, the grading system was percentile or something. So I'd like to see some clarification for people that may not know what exactly an A is, what a B plus is, and a B. So as they calculate GPAs, if they need a 2.0, they'll know what grades, like a 2.0, yes, that's a C. I know that. Maybe most of the board member knows that. But do all of our community members know that?
Sure.
So is there a suggestion in that or a request?
So can we get clarification of what each designated grades are?
I think we can make the commitment to provide communication on what those outside of actually amending the policy. I think we could do that through additional communications, and that's something we can commit to.
So again, that detailed information is actually contained in the superintendent procedure, which is called the counseling manual that governs this particular policy.
Okay.
So we can forward that
Make a reference
information.
to it, or-
We can forward that to you.
Director Geary.
So I guess my concern about this is we're making these incremental changes and we're doing them and we're talking about them. And I think when the big change happens and we actually go to 24 credits, we're going to have a population that's going to be surprised by it, in spite of us having dealt with it over and over in these tiny little bits. So if you could take a moment and say for the public what now is going to happen and how that's going to look like to them, so that we all have a sense of what we should be saying and talking to our public about as we're doing this little work, but we know it's part of a much bigger scheme that we should be daylighting every chance we get.
I appreciate the opportunity. So in brief, the 24 Credit Task Force laid out some of the reasons why this is another one of these, we believe, outdated approaches to defining credits, and there's other ways to do things. And this, by removing this requirement, it allows us to do two things. One, to schedule more flexibly and with more innovation to allow the addition of additional periods and additional credit earning opportunities within the school day, to honor things like work site learning and internships and apprenticeships that we have talked about with many board members already. So this is, when we think about the 24 credit transition, it's more than just ensuring kids earn more credits. It's also in trying to take advantage of that opportunity to improve teaching and learning. And so this additional flexibility will lead both to more credit earning opportunities and more innovation at our high schools. And that's why, again, we're asking for this change.
When can our public expect to know what high school is going to look like in terms of credit structure? What is the timeline for that?
So we have a very important meeting with our high school principals tomorrow to talk about what changes we can make in the 18-19 school year, as well as where we're trying to get to in the 19-20 school year. There's some important details to be worked out. So in terms of when something would be publicly facing, I believe in the December, January timeframe. I can get more specific after tomorrow's meeting and after we've had some of the conversations with principals.
Dr. Harris.
Can you give us just a hint of what is on your agenda tomorrow when you say things like important details to be worked out? You have my attention.
Yes, well, I'll give a preview, which is that we know that it's critically important that our 9th and 10th graders, our 9th graders now, next year our 9th and 10th graders, because they're required to earn 24 credits, many of them will need to have more than 6 credit earning opportunities per year. If the current trend holds up, where 18% of our students only earn 5 or fewer credits each year, that we need to be able to expand those credit earning opportunities within the school day. Now, for next year, this is the details to be worked out. Given issues related to budget and other constraints, we need to be careful, and we need to be cautious, and we need to be deliberative, and that's where, for next year, the discussion is with each school's principal to figure out how best to do that with some additional support, but not enough to make a complete schedule change for the coming school year. And that's where the details, again, I would love to Director Geary's point, to be able to share much more of that when we are able to engage in those detailed conversations with principals in December and January.
Dr. Nyland.
Everything that Caleb said. We have a couple of challenges. One is we had hoped to be able to go forward with a full-fledged plan for 28 or 32 credits. And as we had conversations around our collective bargaining agreement, we realized that although Nathan Hale and Cleveland had models that seemed to get us partway there, when we dug into the details, we found out that they put additional funding in and or they had waivers. So basically a two-pronged approach. We will be working with high schools and saying that we will have some of the funding available to them to do what Caleb described, and be asking them to propose back to us what they can do with partial funding, more funding than what they now have, to meet the needs for 9th graders and 10th graders who are first out of the chute with this new 24 credit requirement. And at the same time, to immediately enter into interest-based bargaining discussions with SEA and with principals participating to go to Cleveland, find out what that really looks like on the ground, try to understand all of the details of the schedule, parse that in terms of our CBA, and then look at some of the other places that have implemented an 8-period block schedule. So, based on what we now know, that may very well be our preferred schedule going forward. But we have to actually start to implement not implement. We have to actually design things that we can implement on the ground that are in compliance with the collective bargaining agreement. So our goal is to get the collective bargaining, well, I'll back up. All of that, ditto. Now, immediately, we'll be talking with high school principals about this partial increase in a funding formula, asking them to go back, work with their BLT, give us a proposal for how they're going to make more options available, particularly for 9th and 10th grade. And at the same time, by June, we want to work through the bargaining process with SEA so that by June, we know what we will be doing for not 2018, but 2019, so that we can do the professional development, we can work with principals on scheduling, we can provide more opportunities to be on the ground with Cleveland or other places that have implemented more complex schedules. So we're trying to do it right in terms of giving more time and opportunity to high school principals and to their BLT to try on, if you will, the things that Nathan Hale and Cleveland have done. And in some cases, that will be they'll try it on by actually doing it. In other places, they'll try it on by trying to figure out how they get ready to do it while providing other creative ways to help 9th graders and 10th graders continue to be credit proficient.
Okay, so I just have a comment. So one of my concerns is about this originally was the idea that are we doing some shortcuts that could end up shortchanging our students by giving them a class that doesn't have time requirements and maybe could be done quickly and isn't really substantial. So do you feel that all these different points that have now been added will give us some assurances that the scenario I just described wouldn't be possible?
I do. I mean, obviously, everything requires implementation, and that's something that my office does, my team in particular. But generally speaking, the central office still vets courses, any high school courses, new high school courses. It goes through a vetting process. The curriculum goes through a vetting process. There's many other checks that are in place in terms of AP course audits, in terms of number of instructional hours, in terms of compulsory attendance. I mean, there's many things in place to make sure that this is not going to result in students getting credits for very little effort and very little work.
Okay, and obviously, one of my main concerns would be the possibilities with an online course that could be done really quickly. And so, do you have anything built into this that will allow for some sort of review, similar to the last conversation we had? Will you have a way of being able to start to tally what kind of classes we end up offering students and what students are choosing and what that looks like? What kind of follow-up are you going to do with this?
Right. Well, in terms of the formal procedure, I'll turn to what Associate Superintendent Tolley referenced earlier in terms of a formal update to the C&I policy team. But I think back to Director Geary's point, there will be the expectation that we would communicate with the board and the larger community about what the approach is to expanding credit earning opportunities for the 9th and 10th graders next year, and that would be the substance of the work. And then I would, again, turn to Associate Superintendent Tolley to think about how we formally include that in a C&I policy update. But I hear the request, it makes sense, and I think we should do it.
Okay, and I would also request that we alert our counseling departments to keep an eye and make sure that we don't have some kids who are taking certain classes and other kids that are taking, more engaged, rich classes, because then we have another equity issue on our hands. So we have to make sure that we're not shortchanging anybody in the interests of following the state mandate. So that's my main concern. And then you have mentioned a couple of times the AP audits, the AP class audits. When do those happen, and do they involve assessment of the content or assessment of the instructor, or both?
It's mainly the content. I might defer to others who know the exact timeline in Washington State, but it's something that has to be an AP instructor. It's a regular thing that the College Board over the last number of years has gotten very good at making sure that the courses that they're saying count as AP courses, in fact, go through a formal vetting process. So I could share more. I don't have the exact timeline here, but I can share.
Yeah, I guess I'll just sort of bookmark that topic for maybe later, because I know from my own experience, my own child had various AP classes, and some were more successful than others, and it largely had to do with the instruction, and there was an inconsistency in the instruction. So, we promise our kids AP classes, especially if we're talking about expanding advanced learning throughout the district, which we should do no matter what. We have to make sure we have the instruction that matches the expectations of the class. All right, Director Harris.
My favorite topic, consistency. So have we determined now what the qualitative issue on advisory periods throughout the district are for high school? And 2, are we analyzing the scoring of the AP classes for those that take the tests and for the IB tests? Do we have a sense, because we haven't had for a very long time, what our pass rates are and what our students are scoring?
I only have a very small answer to that. Director Geary and I have the report from the Council of Great City Schools, and they compare us quite favorably with our counterparts, but that really is not a very full and complete answer. And I'm sure that we do have places where we do need to do better.
I'll only share first per advisory. Again, thank you for the question. I did follow up with a brief email just to provide the rollout plan in terms of ensuring a level of rigor and quality for advisory over the course of this year as we work towards a credit-bearing advisory approach for next year. And the email gets into a little bit more detail on the timeline. In terms of the quality, in terms of the AP and IB piece, what I will say is that it is definitively part of my work plan that I inherited from conversations with the board from the spring in terms of ensuring that not only that there's access, but that there's rigor related to the AP and IB program. I will need to look at the details in terms of what we currently have, but that's certainly on my plate.
Okay, if there's no further questions or comments, let's check the roll call, please. Oh yeah, okay, sorry.
Just want to say I did find the grade scale in the counseling manual on page 35.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I guess we're ready for a vote.
Director Geary? Director Harris?
Aye.
Director Patu?
Aye.
Director Pinkham?
Aye.
Director Blanford?
Aye.
Director Peters?
Aye.
This motion has passed unanimously.
I just want to add a thank you to staff for the collaborative effort between staff and the board on getting the wording right so that we can reach a unanimous vote like this.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 3, Superintendent's Employment Agreement. Employment Agreement, Cost of Living Adjustment, also known as a COLA. So,
I move that the board approve increasing the superintendent's base salary by the COLA amount of 2.3%, or $6,787.22, and authorize the board president to execute Amendment Number 4 to the Superintendent's Employment Agreement as attached to the board action report. The 2.3% COLA is commensurate with 2.3% salary inflation set by state allocation and a regional inflation factor of 3.1%.
I second the motion.
are there any questions or comments about this item? Director Geary, did you have a question? No? Okay, I guess we're ready for the roll on this one.
Director Harris?
Aye.
Director Patu?
Aye.
Director Blanford?
Aye.
Director Geary?
Aye.
Director Pinkham?
Aye.
Director Peters?
Aye.
This motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Let the record show that Superintendent Nyland is appreciative. Okay, item 4, BTA 4, award construction contract K5078, bid number B08705 to Forma Construction Company for the Magnolia Elementary School renovation and addition project.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute construction contract K5078 to Forma Construction Company for the Magnolia Elementary School renovation and addition project in the amount of $26,217,500, including alternates 1B, automatic temperature controls for $690,500, alternative 2, south addition build-out for $1,077,000, and alternative 3, linoleum flooring for $0, plus Washington State sales tax in the form of the draft agreement attached to the board action report with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary action to implement the contract. In addition, I move that the school board authorize a transfer of $5 million from BTA 4 program contingency to the Magnolia Elementary School renovation and addition project budget.
I second the motion.
Okay, may we please hear from the chair of the Operations Committee for both this item and the following item?
Sure. This item was heard on May the 18th and moved forward for consideration. The next item was heard on June the 15th and moved forward for consideration.
Richard Best, Director of Capital Projects and Planning. We did make some minor modifications to the board action report. We included the alternates language in the recommended motion, and then we also included information in the fiscal impact revenue source concerning the transfer of the $5 million from the BTA 4 program contingency. So I'd open up to questions.
Are there any questions or comments? There were some comments brought up during public commentary. Is there anything that you'd want to speak to on those? Let's see.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. The
Yeah,
public
okay. One of
comments.
them says that the project bids are over budget by $5 million. Is that correct?
Correct. That
Okay.
is correct.
And could you speak to that again, why that is so?
Current construction market is extremely competitive or extremely overextended in city of Seattle, and I would say the Puget Sound Basin. There are, I think we're paying a construction market condition premium at this moment in time. We do have a need for this school to come online. We have crowded conditions both in the Queen Anne and Magnolia communities, and that's why we're recommending we move forward with this project at this time. We did in May bid this project. We bid the project did come in approximately $6 million over budget at that moment in time. We worked with our architects and engineers to revise the project from May to try to get costs down. We're now recommending $5 million be transferred from the BTA4 program contingency. We did not want to compromise the educational program offerings in Magnolia Elementary School when it reopens, but we did make some compromises on architectural finishes and then some fairly significant revisions to the mechanical systems that were initially contemplated in this building to reduce that cost. We were able to reduce that cost by approximately $1 million. So.
Are there any questions or comments? Director Patu?
I just want to make a comment that I will not support any PTA until I see schools in the South End are actually attention to. Rainier Beach, Aki Karosi, and Mercer are old as heck and definitely needs attention. So I'm going to vote no on this.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Scheck, the roll call, please.
Director Blanford,
Aye.
Director Geary,
Aye.
Director Harris,
Aye.
Director Patu,
No.
Director Pinkham,
No.
Director Peters.
Aye.
This motion has passed with a vote of 4-2.
Okay. Item number 5. All right, award 3-year contract to Hobson's Naviance for new college and career readiness software solution services and support.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute a contract with Hobson's Naviance in the total amount of $619,538 over 3 years for a career and college readiness software solution in the form of the draft agreement attached to the school board action report, with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract.
I second the motion.
Okay. Has anything, looks like something has changed since it was introduced. Can you please speak to any changes?
Yes, thanks again for the opportunity to speak to another aspect of our secondary revisioning work and the work that came out of the 24 Credit Task Force. This was one of the pieces that 24 Credit Task Force asked for greater support for counselors, particularly an online tool. What has not changed is the merits, we believe, of the program and the usefulness of the tool and the number of folks who believe strongly that this could be enormously helpful in helping students get access and families get access, more equitable access to information about college and careers. What has changed is some of the questions that have come up. So we believe that there were a number of questions that were asked at the introduction meeting with the board. We believe we've answered a lot of those questions. At the same time, there's been many more questions in the last 24, 48 hours. And we, in the interest of transparency, in the interest of furthering the discussion and to implement this potential contract in the most careful way possible, we wanted to have a public exchange, and I invited up our Chief Information Officer, John Krull, to help address some of the very important questions that have been raised around data security, data privacy, and the other pieces that have been raised. So With that, we will open up to your questions.
Okay. So did
Excuse-
you highlight what it is that you've added since last time? Since introduction? Is there anything, are there any
And in
red
terms of the
lines?
board action report, I don't believe there's what's been added are the attachments.
The attachments are new?
that related to those.
Okay.
And so that includes, we shared a lot of information very recently that includes the project summary, the contract document, the statement about ADA compliance, and a number of other components that relate to how this contract will be implemented in a careful way.
Okay, and you pointed out that some of this information was added recently. I think it was added yesterday. Is that right? Can you speak to why it wasn't added last week? Because the public has asked us questions about why all the attachments weren't a part of it.
I think it's a fair question. I believe my understanding was that some of those pieces had already gone out, and perhaps they had not been shared as thoroughly as they could. So, point taken.
Okay. All right.
And on that one, my understanding is the board office is working on making items that aren't ADA compatible, making those available in the board office and slimming down the number of attachments.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions or comments about this item? Director Patu.
I guess I would like to know what guarantee that we have that the information that you get on students will not be leaked out.
Thank you for that question. There's been a lot of communication about privacy and security. Like a lot of our applications that DOTS, the Department of Technology Services, offers, those are hosted by third parties, and we do a very thorough vetting of those third parties. So Naviance has been vetted by both the legal department and the technology department. Naviance has a privacy policy that's very public. They have it on their website at naviance.com/privacy, which explains their privacy. I have made a few notes based on some of the feedback I got. We don't have time to get into the full security analysis, but some key points are Naviance does not sell student process for sharing any data with third-party partners, and Seattle Public Schools has chosen not to do that opt-in process. So there will be no sharing of third parties with third parties. There was a concern about Naviance holding our data and having it for a long time, so we made sure that my department has the ability to extra long. There was a concern about student IDs being with the third party, and when third parties allow it, we de-identify that. We use what's called a proxy ID, so Naviance will not have the student IDs. We also, again, if you look at the Naviance privacy website, they talk about the amount of data that they store, and based on the feedback we got from the community, we are going to share the minimal amount of data with Naviance. So we won't be putting data up there. The minimal amount of data includes the student name, the proxy ID, the school, and the grade level. That's the minimum just to use the product. Students have the option, and parents will have the option, but they don't need to put more information in there. So instead of just pushing massive amounts of data from our student information system, we will put the minimal amount of data in Naviance. And then finally, again, based on feedback, is along with Dr. Perkins' office, we are going to be providing an opt-out program. So if students don't want to use Naviance, or parents have concerns and they want to make that choice, we're going to have a process that's not just a technology process of turning them off. My department can handle that easily, but working with the education side of the house, the parents will understand that they have the option to opt out, and they'll have some alternative assignments. But I'll leave it to them on actually how the parents will be informed, but that'll definitely be an option. So that's just the highlights of addressing the concerns. Again, like the other applications that we bring forth to the board, they have a full legal review. We've learned from the past. We make sure we have the right clauses in there for protecting the data. We have our own internal security processes that we outlined at the board work session with IT. We have logging. We have security protocols in place to really add that extra layer so we will know if there's any issues.
Director Blanford and then Director Geary.
In my discussion about the fact that this had gone to the Operations Committee, I neglected to mention the fact that it had come to the Operations Committee twice, and it also went to the Curriculum and Instruction Committee. I think this is a classic conundrum that in our 4 years on the board has come up numerous times, where we have a technological solution to address a problem that our educators have told us exists. And then we are struggling with the issue of data security and ensuring that we don't have a repeat of prior experiences where our data was hijacked or held longer than we wanted it to. And I think this discussion does not include, has not so far included, and I'm encouraging you to provide some information on what our educators have said this problem will help them to solve. Because it's important for us to know why we're having this conversation and taking potentially the risk associated with getting a product, even though I feel fairly comfortable with the guarantees around data security that you've shared. If those actually come to pass, I have a high level of confidence that we're good, but I think it's important for you to share the benefit that goes along with the risk.
Before Dr. Perkins goes, I wanted to address your first comment about first going to operations and then to C&I. What I'm really trying to do is change the paradigm of how DOTS is operating. So originally, anything that was technology was, for some reason, considered a DOTS project. So I want to be responsible for security and privacy, but I want to be in support of what C&I is trying to do. So traditionally, before I got here, this was getting geared up for operations because it was a technology, because it runs on technology, but it's really a C&I product. So what I'm trying to build is build a reputation that we're going to provide security and privacy. I'm going to work closely with my very professional IT or privacy department in tandem with legal, but it's going to be in support of what C&I is doing. So with that, I'll pass it along.
Yes, thank you, Director Blanford. I appreciate the opportunity to review some of the things that we've shared previously, and in fact, some of the board directors have shared as being advantages of this particular tool. To capture some of the comments from the 24 Credit Task Force, the desire is to support the counseling work that goes on in our schools in a number of levels, and the task force went into many different recommendations, including things around staffing. But accompanying with staffing was the idea that powerful online tools that can better link students to colleges, to careers, to help them think about those, to become a focal point for how they can figure out and navigate all the various options out there in an easy way, is the crux of the issue. And it's the thing that many, many school districts use, just to name a few, around Bellevue, Highline, Everett, Shoreline, Spokane, Kent, Sumner, as well as outside of the state, LA Unified, Houston School District. Each of them has looked at those pros and cons, the benefits, and ultimately judged that the benefits outweighed the risks, and that's where we are as well.
Director Geary?
The question that I have is that I don't understand why, if there's a proxy ID, Naviance has to be in charge of that. Why can't we create the proxy ID and maintain our students' names within our system? I don't necessarily trust, once they get the name, that we're going to have any ability to know what they've done with that information in spite of a contract. We don't have the staff necessary to be monitoring them. You know, we don't want to assign somebody just to monitor the data. If it's released, I don't know how we would know that it's been released. And I really did like Melissa Westbrook's point that what is the penalty for a failure on their part? And so those are my concerns. Like, and it really comes down to, why must we give them our students' names? Why can't we create the proxy ID?
I may have misspoke when I explained that earlier. We will give the proxy ID to them. So we create the proxy ID on our end and then pass that to Naviance.
But you said minimally, we also must give them the student's name.
Minimally, we give them we can give them the last name. It's going to be easier for the student, I would imagine, to have their first name and their last name.
So, yes, I could see that, but the student's going to be interfacing it directly into Naviance, or are they going through our system into Naviance? Is there any way that the system, maybe I just don't understand the technology of it, but.
Yeah, technically, they're going to be logging in through our system. So another nice thing about Naviance is they use the single sign-on system that we do. But within their system, they need an ID for the student, and if it would be a little bit less secure if we passed our actual student ID, so we'll pass a proxy ID, but they need an ID in their database to identify the student.
So forgive me my ignorance. We set it up on our side, and our side, when the student puts in their name, triggers the proxy ID, the Naviance, not our student ID, the proxy ID, and then goes into the system, does all the stuff out in the software in the cloud, and brings it back into our student. Again, I don't understand why the student's name has to leave our system, and why the conduit, once there's the interface with Naviance, can't be done through the number. I just don't see why we have to release to them into their system that piece of information, because that's the piece that once it's released, we can never grab it back.
It's the minimal amount of data. I mean, theoretically, if we wanted to just pass an anonymous ID, that could be possible. This is very, like I mentioned in my overview, there are other systems that we are doing this with. Naviance is not a new system. Again, like I said, each year we're bringing different products to the board, and we are managing the security and the privacy with the best, the skillful team that we have.
Have we asked Naviance if we cannot give them the names?
We asked them, and they said the minimum is the last name. They did say the minimal was to provide the gender, and we got them to not do the gender. So it's really a very minimal amount of data that we're giving them, and we're, again, giving the students the option to add any more data. So at a very bare minimum, it would have their ID, which is just a made-up ID because it's proxied. It would have their last name and no data other than which is directory data, just their school name.
And again, but without additional data, the tool is fairly useless. I mean, it's not going to be able to advise the student back because it doesn't have any information. Then all options are on the table. It's the additional data that makes the tool useful.
Exactly.
And that is the data that, when tied to that person's name, becomes a marketer's dream. And so again, it's just why, in terms of tracking that human being throughout their life, and maybe last name is enough of a barrier not to target that person should all that information escape out into the greater wilds, but I don't know. And I guess I want to be able to
I-
assure my families.
Yeah, I think, like I said, legal has really worked on the data sharing agreement with DOTS. We're putting a lot of protections in place, and we're really trying to meet the needs of people who do not want any data out there. You can opt out and have absolutely nothing in there, or there can be the minimal amount of data. So we're really trying to be sensitive to that. But there, on the other hand, as Dr. Perkins said, there are counselors and students who want to have this, use this tool. We really want a tool that students can use across all of our schools. So we definitely want to give the option to have people put more data in if they would like. And again, we studied their privacy policy. We put a strong data sharing agreement that we learned from past issues to have that strong data sharing agreement.
And this is my final comment. I would rather our students be able to put in all sorts of information and not their name so that they can get the full access to the tool without the fear of a leak that then gives all this incredible information about them. I would prefer that system if only we could keep a hold of their name and only send that out through the proxy ID. That to me would be the ideal. That makes it a win-win for everybody. And I simply can't believe that with all these geniuses doing programming that that's not possible. And so that's what makes me, because I know students are out there giving College Board all this information. I know they're filling out all things. And we're, as parents, I do start to wonder how much is out there that they are doing, but we're different because we're sanctioning it. And so it's our job to protect them even when, as we know, our adolescents aren't necessarily very good at protecting themselves online. But we're asking them to divulge a lot of information, and we're creating a system in order to be effective, they must. They must, because that's what's going to make the counselors be able to use the tool. So I'm feeling this, again, I feel in this day and age, why we must release the name in order to use this tool so robustly is still not clear to me.
Director Peters, I'm wondering if we, just to allude to a previous conversation, whether, in interest of transparency, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have this exchange and to be able to hear from Mr. Krull about some of those specific items. I think it's important, but ultimately, we're at a point where we think the benefits outweigh the risks. But if there's more questions that we need to answer to help others process that, we would absolutely be committed to putting those answers together in more information and post that publicly to give people an opportunity to see that more clearly, if that would be helpful. So that's just one thought. I know there's others that have comments, so I'm not trying to cut off discussion. But
And are you saying that because you're referring to the conversation we had earlier, that also meant that we would gather some questions tonight, and then you would come back to us with the FAQ, and you'll come back to us with the item to vote on
Correct.
at the next board
That's
meeting?
correct. That's what I'm
Okay,
suggesting.
so that is an option we could do. Director Harris, I believe, has some questions.
I'm very conflicted by this. I believe that Associate Superintendent and I started talking about this 18 months ago with my chagrin that this tool is being used in private schools and that the Bellevue Schools Foundation gifts it to the Bellevue School District, and that our children and students ought to be able to compete with private school students and other school district students. It struck me with Director Geary's comments that the fact that we don't have a liquidated damages clause in here for data breach or for misuse of our data, or a liquidated damage clause in every one of our sensitive data pieces, is perhaps an oversight. Certainly the liquidated damage clause in the first student bus agreement is something that we're very, very, very happy is there now, because it provides significant leverage. So I would ask that we address that issue, and we make it hurt. We make it significant enough that we are doing our due diligence to protect that very valuable data. I heard the reference to we will do an opt-out plan. That's not good enough for me. I'm sorry. That needs to be part and parcel of a bar out of respect to our students and our families. And opt-out is not a bad phrase, in my opinion. And I've also heard an apples, what feels to me like an apples to oranges comparison, saying that if we're going to spend $620,000 on this tool, why don't we just hire more counselors so we have better than a 1 to 400, 1 to 450 ratio? 2 more points, and then I'll be more than happy to make a motion to table this after all of my colleagues have had an opportunity to speak. And I pass this on as well from Director Burke in Japan, who I spoke with 4 times today. Apparently, our governor just came back from Switzerland. And apparently, our governor has a new computerized tool that is going to make us breakfast and lattes that will address some of the same issues here, and it will be free for us. Can you expand on when that's going to happen, if in fact we're looking at free, robust tools, $620,000 tools? And my last question is this part of the College Board arms race where Naviance points you to college and we look beyond other vocations, apprenticeships, etc.? And Director Geary's comment about the College Board arms race throughout high school, I think we probably filled 3 or 4 or 5 dumpsters of solicitations to our students. They're all really shiny and really pretty and frankly false advertising. And I don't like that arms race. And if we're contributing to it, then how do we not contribute it to it? Thank you.
Let me do my best to address some of those. First of all, I think we're all eager to hear what came of Governor Inslee's visit to Switzerland, given our strong interest on the board on career-connected learning and expanding those opportunities. So in terms of a specific tech tool coming out of that conversation, I am learning just like you are on that front. In terms of what others have referenced in recent email exchanges on other potentially free tools, we have looked at those tools. The ones we're aware of do some of the pieces of Naviance, but have far less access. So one example of one tool that was referenced is linked to about 130 institutions of higher education, as opposed to more like 5,000 in Naviance, and they exclude many universities within Washington State. So seems like the wrong way to go in terms of a comprehensive solution to provide equity to our students. In terms of making sure the Naviance tool is not just pushing the 4-year bachelor's as for everybody as the one solution, the only way, I think we absolutely share that. It's my understanding that Naviance is a customizable tool and has the ability to discuss and help students think about careers as much as colleges, but that's up to our work here in the district to tailor that and make sure that the efforts are balanced in that respect. So those are just some initial answers. You've raised some larger questions that I think are worth considering.
The one question about hiring counselors instead, I wanted to point out that this would be coming from BTA 4 funds, which are earmarked for technology and related projects.
Thank you.
Director Pinkham.
I share similar concerns as Director Geary in that how much information we are sharing with Naviance. Because it does seem that we can just come up with a proxy ID that doesn't include the name, school, and grade level, that information just ties a student ID and their name and stuff stays with us, but their grades and stuff are over with Naviance, so that has no other identification other than this proxy ID. Then once we match those two up, boom, there's all the information. Naviance doesn't have any names. All they have is school data that has no identifiable information that someone can lose and hack into and use. And so that's why I'm wondering, they're first saying, no, we need this plus gender. You got to drop the gender. I would ask to push, drop the last name as well. All you need is this proxy ID, because, and then we can keep all the names and stuff in-house. Because all we're really concerned about is their grades and performance, right? If I'm understanding this right, for Naviance, to help us track how a student is doing, are they on track, and to graduate their grades, et cetera. So that kind of stuff can stay there without any identifiable information other than that proxy ID. To me, that seems something that can be done. And then other questions that come up as far as Naviance saying third parties. Do we have examples who these third parties are? Are one of those third parties the College Board? Are one of these third parties, who are these possible third parties that can have access to the information? I think that's, again, one of our public commenters brought up, who are these third parties? And I think that would be something we need to share when am I going to opt in or opt out? And last, I guess, what would be the alternative for those that opt out?
I mean, the very short answer there is currently an online tool called WSIPSI related to the High School and Beyond plan. It's a much more basic tool that the state provides in terms of helping students, plan their college, their high school careers as well as beyond. But again, it's very basic. So that would be essentially the alternative.
Director Blanford.
It is appearing that the direction of this conversation is moving towards us not taking action potentially on this meeting, which is disappointing because I won't be around for the next meeting, and I had hoped that I'd be able to cast a vote on this. That said, I think in the research that you're doing, if there is indeed a motion to table this and bring it up at a later board meeting, I'm hoping that you will be able to share the experience of other districts that have had this product and what any issues that have come up before. I talked a little bit about the conundrum that we face between the risk and the reward that is associated with making this type of decision, and it seems to me that that type of information may reveal that this is another example of Seattle exceptionalism, that the kids in Houston or the other places that were listed have had to date a positive experience with this product. There hasn't been a data breach, and I don't like being in the position of having to defend something that may happen in the future, but there's risk associated with the enterprise that we're involved in, and sometimes those types of things happen. We can protect the data to the nth degree, but actually make it unusable for the students. And then the problem that we're trying to solve actually manifests and gets bigger. And so my hope is that you'll be able to share the type of experience that other districts have had, maybe some that are smaller than us and some that are larger. So it helps to paint the picture, both of the risk that's associated, but also the benefit that's associated. Because I, again, think that has been a part of the conversation that we haven't had as robust a dialogue on that subject.
Thank you. Director Geary?
I want to bring up this other point because it's not one that we've brought up a lot. And I'm very mindful of the fact that this is a tool that will potentially give a lot of power in terms of this kind of work to people who can't access it through their own funds. They can't buy a person to help them with this work. They can't buy a tool that is similar to this online that one might be able to purchase that has all of these options in it. Because I've seen the ones online that really limit you and you can't get particular schools. And when you buy one, all of a sudden you have tons more information. I have the ability to do that. I'm also mindful as a former legal services attorney that poor people don't have they don't have the same privacy rights because they're out there having to give away their information just to get by in a lot of cases. They have to share a lot in order to get this or that, And so that may not be high on mind in terms of trading privacy for a robust tool. But I haven't heard that much from those communities. They're not communities that we can access. But I am mindful that there are certain worlds where that kind of privacy seems like a privilege that they can't afford to have. And I think we all need to be mindful of that as well in terms of whether or not we're going to allow access to a really robust tool. I think a lot of my pushing back is because the fact that Naviance wants a name just makes me nervous when I think that technologically it's not required. That to me is just, is there a way to push back on them to get rid of that and still be able to use the number to get all of the other benefits? And that's what I want us to do, take that extra step to push back. And if it looks like a board's not going to buy their very expensive product, they may find a way to make that exception for us for the amount of money we're giving them. And that's really what I want. I want a great tool to be accessible for our families, that they don't have to trade away something for it that isn't necessary. We're paying a lot of money. We should be able to do this.
So I would like to second those comments. And so I think you're probably mentally putting together a list. And so I'm going to either add to it or just sort of back up what has been said, and that is, there's been talk of a strong data sharing agreement. And John, you said we've put in a strong data sharing agreement. We would like to see that agreement. So could you please attach that to this? There's talk about allowing families to either start from an opt-in or opt-out, just give them the flexibility. Like to Jill's point, there might be some people who are less concerned about it. I feel that regardless of that, we as a district are responsible for the welfare and the data and the privacy of 54,000 students, and so we maintain a standard that we apply to all of them, but we can honor families' autonomy by giving them the opt-in or opt-out, wherever we're starting from option. So I think it sounds like everyone would like to have that more clearly stated somewhere in the bar. So it's not just a wisp of an aspirational goal, but it's actually stated somewhere. And let's see. I agree with Jill. Let's see if we can go back to them and say, look, the board's right on the edge here, and we're really uncomfortable with sharing anything that you don't really need with your greater cloud or whatever it is they have. So could we do it without having the student's name? Can we use a proxy ID all the way through? And then, let's see. To Leslie's point about whether we can ever have a clause in there about the misuse of data or the breach of data, that is something that I'm also interested in as well. That might be for a future conversation. I think about Experian. We've had so many cases where there have been major, that's where something's been hacked, but we as a district have not always been on top of our data, and we've had data breaches, that we've released. And so it can happen, and we have to, for that reason, protect our students' data as much as we can with proxies and things like that. And then we should also make sure that there's consequences with any of the vendors that we're dealing with. And then in terms of how third parties can use this information, I would like that also to be explicit and limited. Director Harris, do you have something you'd like to say?
If in fact this gets tabled and that you are willing to provide more information and robust information, might I suggest that we have a public meeting here with a demonstration of the product, and we have some high school counselors who would be folks who would be using said product, and then you can come back to us with things like the opt-out, et cetera. If you can tangibly touch it, see it, understand it, I think we'll be a lot farther ahead with all the other caveats that have been expressed. But every time I think of our counselor to student high school ratio, it's visceral illness. It's not acceptable. Thank you.
Okay.
If-
So,
If I can summarize what we have to make sure that we come back with the correct information. One thing I want to point out, as far as the demo, we did invite board and community to a demo. That would take, we scheduled an hour for that. So my suggestion there is that we do that again, but not during a board meeting. So we'll schedule that again. My list I have, the main thing is we're going to go back to Naviance and see if we can go with just the proxy ID and not the student name. We're going to find, right now we're choosing not to even let them partner with any third parties, but we will get a list of third parties that could possibly be partnered with, so we have that information. We'll get experiences from other districts. We'll share the data sharing agreement. We will give the specifics on the opt-out policy. We will look into a breach penalty and then demonstration. So I think that is everything. Any further comments on what we should come back with?
oh, did you also mention feedback from other districts? that have
Yes.
used it? You did, okay. Thanks. Director Harris?
So, Mr. General Counsel, do we move to table this non-debatable to a time certain, or does staff withdraw this bar to take it up at a later date? What's our procedural move here, please?
Yeah, I think since the board has already made and seconded a motion, I think you now have to make a motion either to postpone to a specific date or to table it and then let the exec committee reschedule it once it's determined what the right timing's going to be.
Unfortunately, I move to table.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
And that, as Director Harris pointed out, under Robert's rules, a motion to table isn't debatable. So once the motion's made and seconded, you then just vote it up or down.
Okay, and is that just yay or nay, or do we do a roll call?
You'll do a roll call.
Okay, all right, then may we have the roll call, please? This is the motion to table.
Director Blanford,
Nay.
Director Director Geary,
Aye.
Director Harris,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Pinkham,
Aye.
Director Peters.
Aye.
This motion has passed with a vote of 5-1.
I want to thank staff for the work they've done and in advance for the work they're about to help us with. Thank you. That leaves us one more action item for this evening. That is action 6, approval of a contract for an executive search firm to conduct a superintendent search. This came to, go on, sorry.
I move that the school board authorize the board president to execute a contract on the district's behalf with Ray and Associates in the amount of $35,500 plus $14,800 in estimated reimbursable expenses for the purpose of conducting a superintendent search. Immediate action is in the best interest of the district.
I second the motion.
Okay, this came to the executive committee on November 8th, where it was advanced for consideration because I believe we didn't have all our information in place at that time. So the board met and we took a look at the proposals that we received in response to our request for proposal. We received a total of 4, and we carefully looked at them all, and let's see, we evaluated each one, and based on the sort of consensus, Ray and Associates is the proposal that rose to the top. And so what we were doing today is approving the next step. I'm going to ask Erin Bennett if she could come up and just fill in anything I have not said. Have I covered it? Okay. All right.
Erin Bennett, Government Relations and Strategic Initiatives. I think you did. We met on the 8th and went through and talked about, based on what the RFP that was sent out and in which we received the 4 responses. And this motion would authorize you as the president to execute a contract on the district's behalf with Ray and Associates.
Okay. And could you speak a little bit to the timeline on this, the next steps?
Sure. So a little bit is kind of as determined as you go and you decide your approach. But the proposal from Ray and Associates did include an initial meeting with the board of directors to talk about that approach the week after next, so the week of November 28th, I believe. After that, there is a proposed timeline in the documents that are attached to the board action report within the proposal itself. And there is a proposed sort of month-to-month schedule in there. Obviously, it would depend on what the board and the executive committee determines are the next steps.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments about this item? Okay. Oh, Director Geary.
As you all know, my board members, I am very conflicted about moving forward with a superintendent search at this time because of my perception that there's so many moving parts that, for me, I feel the weight of the need of stability at this point, and having a superintendent who knows our district well to move us forward towards the collective bargaining agreement, towards figuring out what McCleary actually means for our district. And we haven't had a chance to talk about this in the public, and I know part of the rationale for moving forward with this was to allow the public to participate in the superintendent search, but by doing what we have done, we didn't necessarily allow the public to participate very well in the idea of moving forward with the search at all, so the option of not doing a search. And here we are on an intro action item. So there's just much about this process that has made me uncertain. And as I already explained earlier today, I don't like being in conflict with my board. I like for us to move forward as a unit that is taking everything into consideration. But those are things that my gut of guts makes me so nervous about this move with so many things unknown, trying to figure out with those unknown who's going to be the right leader and what that person will then have to face coming in right at the moment of a collective bargaining period, which we know was rather rough last time. There's just so many unknowns. So for that reason, I don't think I can support this. But I do appreciate the work and effort that has gone in by my colleagues who do believe this is the right thing to do now.
Director Blanford.
By and large, Director Geary stole my thunder. When the board met and had this conversation, I did a little bit of back of the envelope calculation, and if things turn out the way that they very well could, I would say probable, there is high probability that we will be concluding a superintendent search at the same time that we are engaged in contract negotiations with our teachers union. And that should be troubling to anyone who cares about the district, because whereas the CBA contract is critically important, it will intersect with a new superintendent coming in that will have a number of issues that he or she wants to move forward, and the detail that's associated with those types of negotiations, as those of us who were around for the last time know, are very complex, and I wouldn't wish that on any new incoming superintendent. For that reason, I shared with my colleagues not so much the belief that they are incapable of handling it, but just that there are huge there are a huge number of issues that will be all landing on our desks as board members, or their desks as board members. And I fear for the capacity of the district as a whole to be able to manage all of those issues, including a superintendent search. So I also intend to vote against this one.
Okay. I'll say a few words. Well, by way of chronology, it was almost a year ago that the board decided that they would pursue a search. And I think it was December 16th of last year. So it's not something, December 7th, thank you. So it's not something we rushed into, and it was a public vote. So the public was informed of that, and it has been mentioned various times. And so we proceeded with the next steps. The fact of the matter is, for 6 years now, the public has not been allowed to engage in any aspect of our superintendent selection. And through decisions that were made by previous boards that I disagreed with, where the public was completely cut out, our labor partners were completely cut out, and we didn't engage the public. So for the first time in 6 years, we actually are going to engage the public. And part of the goal of having a search firm is one of their main duties is going to be, hearing from the board who it is we need to hear, who it is from the community we want to engage in, and they're going to help facilitate that. And we're going to ask the public what kind of vision they want as we move forward as a district, and what kind of vision they want in a leader. So I'm excited about the opportunity of finally being very open about asking the public to weigh in our communities. The other point is, in terms of the district overloading itself, we very pointedly decided to extend the strategic plan that was supposed to end in 2018, extend it by 1 year for the very reason that we didn't want to have too many things going on at once. So to allow the district, to allow the board time to focus on the search first, and then once a new superintendent is in place and the new board is in place, the new board can work with the new superintendent to establish the next strategic plan. And so it was a very thoughtful chronology that we set up. The other thing that we haven't seen in a long time is a board being able to conduct a search without duress. Shortly after I joined the board, our superintendent at the time quit. And he was only 2 years into a 3 or 4 year contract. Before that, we had a superintendent leave, we had one fired. We've just had a lot of things happen unexpectedly. What is good about this process is that it's being done thoughtfully. We're doing things in advance, and this is the right way to go about these sorts of changes. In terms of the CBA, there's always going to be something going on with the district, whether it's the CBA negotiations for the teachers union next year or for the principals association, or there's always going to be something. So you can always come up with a reason not to do something, not to advance on a search or whatever it is. And so we don't have the option, we don't have the luxury of saying, well, we can't do anything like this until everything is calm. Things will never be calm here. But we can aspire to that. I'll also point out, we did, even under the current leadership, we did experience a strike during the last collective bargaining agreement negotiations, even with Dr. Nyland. So that can happen. Whether or not we have Dr. Nyland or we have a new leader, there's things that can happen. And so I would recommend that the board look for somebody who does have good labor experience and labor negotiating experience, and that would be one of the traits to look for. So I believe that for all these reasons, we should be moving forward on this. We did meet as a board. We did carefully look at the proposals. The one that did rise to the top does seem promising, and it feels like it is the right step for us to take as we move forward with this district. Director Harris.
Thank you. I would echo a number of your comments. I would also suggest that the vote that we took December 7th, 2016, we knew about all of these issues at that time, and we voted unanimously. I have extreme confidence in the depth of our bench I have extreme confidence of the folks who show up here every day, quality, experienced folks, that we can handle these challenges. So, as much as I appreciate the comments and the concerns of my colleagues, I would suggest to you that I do care greatly about the district, but I have a fundamental belief that we are capable of good and great things. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Scheck, the roll call, please.
Director Blanford,
No.
Director Geary,
No.
Director Harris,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Pinkham,
Aye.
Director Peters.
Aye.
This motion has passed with a vote of 4 to 2.
Okay, thank you. So we now move on to the introduction portion of our agenda.
Madam President, may I be excused? I am not feeling well.
You most certainly may.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I do that too?
No, you may not.
I can't.
We would practically lose a quorum.
I could just leave.
Yeah, you could, but how would that look?
I'm the boss of me.
All right, so introduction items. Okay, item number 1, the repeal of School Board Procedure E14.04, Research Activity and Test Administration Procedure, and adoption of new School Board Policy number 4280, Research Activity. And let's see. You hear from the CNI department, since the chair
This
is in
came
here.
to CNI on November 7th and was passed through to the board for approval.
Okay.
Good evening. Eric Anderson, Director of Research and Evaluation. The purpose of this bar is to update the old E1404 procedure to distinguish between two components of the old or current procedure: research activity and test administration. Specifically, the bar is intended to accomplish 4 things. First, to update the numbering system from the old E-series to policy number 4280. Second, it places the language on test administration into a new superintendent procedure for our assessment policy 2080. Third, it adds language on research activity that was missing in the old procedure specific to student data privacy. And finally, we've added a new superintendent procedure stating district policies and practices for the formal review of external applications to conduct research in Seattle Public Schools. By focusing on this new policy 4280, by focusing this policy 4280 on research activity, we are recognizing that as a large growing urban school district, there will continue to be increasing interest from external researchers to study our education practices and our policies in our schools. It is our hope that this bar will clarify the district's approach to formal research review and also ensure that test administration policies is covered within our assessment policy. I want to hand it over now to Dr. Jessica Beaver, Senior Research Scientist in Research and Evaluation, who coordinates the formal research review process for the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Beaver, Research and Evaluation. So the Research and Evaluation Department instituted a formal review process in 2016 where we began to systematically track and review our external research proposals. So as stated in the policy 4280, we evaluate all proposals on 4 criteria: the rigor of the research design, the relevance of the project to district priorities, the burden to participants and to the district as a whole, and also the risks and benefits to participants. As part of this process, we reach out to program managers, department directors to make sure that they give input on all of these elements, but specific emphasis on the relevance piece and the risks and the burdens. Since our process began in June 2016, we've received 49 external research applications and 9 partnership requests. Across the last 2 years, if you take that all together, it's about a 65% approval rate. If the Research Review Committee approves a project that includes direct contact with the school, we then require that the researchers reach out to the principals to ask them if that principal will allow the researchers into the school. Principals, we make very clear to principals, they are under no obligation to allow that research to take place in their school if they do not think it's a good fit for their school for any reason. And we do have some evidence that schools are exercising their right to refusal for certain research proposals. Finally, we require that any researchers share their final findings to our department and the district in general upon completion of the project. And we're happy to answer any questions about the policy or research review practices in general. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments? Dr. Blanford?
Quick one. I appreciate that recitation of the process, which is really helpful. As someone who had to reach out to a school district to get access to data and then to do this, I know that at the University of Washington, we had to go through a pretty rigorous human subjects board process before we were able to do this. Is that something that's a part of our process?
Yes, thank you. So if the research proposal involves primary data collection, so collection of data from a human subject, we require that they have what's the Institutional Review Board human subjects approval in place prior to review by the Research Review Committee. So it's important to note that we don't function as our own Institutional Review Board, but rather require that that be in place beforehand. Thank you.
I'll just say one more quick thing, and as a closing remark, I know that there's huge value in having collaborations with researchers who are out in the field, who are asking really critical questions that we may not have the capacity to one, to ask, and two, to answer. And they're willing to do the research, and particularly if they're willing to share it with us, I know that there's lots of value to be gained. So I appreciate the partnerships that are in place, and I appreciate the fact that there's a pretty rigorous process in place to approve those so that we can be sure that it's beneficial to the district and that it doesn't harm either our educators or our students. But working in partnership, having a clean process is going to result in an increase in knowledge and adds to the field that help us to resolve some of the big challenges that we face, particularly around improving instruction for all of our students and closing our opportunity gaps. So thank you for that.
Just one quick point. Jessica, or Dr. Beaver, in her role, one thing that she does do, we have all the leverage. They want to do research in our schools, and we have the opportunity to deny that. So she will frequently, in partnership with program managers, work with the researchers if we have concerns about their design, if we have concerns about using up too much time in our schools, and quite frequently the research will make those adjustments. So we are not just, it's not just a yes or no thing. We actually do work with them to make sure that the research is properly calibrated and is of rigorous design.
Director Pinkham?
Just something that comes to my mind as I read stuff that refers to federal and state laws, that oftentimes we must remember tribal government laws as well. So I don't know if this is everything that's ever been thought. I don't know how many tribal laws would impact the Seattle School District, if there is anything that, just something that comes to mind when I see mention of certain levels of government, that we also must acknowledge that tribes are governments as well.
So my question is around the role of parents and guardians. Is there any element of consent that's required from them?
Yes, parental consent is required for any contact that researchers may have with students, and that is to make that distinction between parental consent and student assent. We say that student assent is not sufficient for a research proposal going forward. Parental consent must be in place.
Okay. And then are families given advance notice significant advance notice so they can decide whether or not to allow their student to participate?
I would say that depends on the research proposal. We don't have any guidelines about the timing of the delivery of the consent forms.
Okay.
We do spell out what needs to be in the consent form so that it's standardized, so that parents, if they're getting multiple different research proposals, can very quickly glean what the proposal is and what the potential data that's going to be collected from students and what the potential risks are and contact information. But to answer your question directly, no, there's no specific guideline about timelines.
Okay. I guess my main concern is that at least there's some element of advance notice, so they're not told after the fact, oh, your student was administered this test today, by the way. So they're told in advance.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely in
good.
advance.
Any other questions or comments about this item? All right, thank you. So the next item is amend and rename policy number 3240, student conduct and discipline, to student behavior and disciplinary responses, and repeal policy D82.00, intervention for violent exceptional misconduct prior to readmittance to regular schools. And
This
see.
came to CNI on November 7th and was passed through to the board for approval.
Is it just a title change?
Good evening, Erin Romanek, Program Manager for Discipline. I am proud to be here tonight to present you a revised and renamed School Board Policy 3240, from student conduct and discipline to student behavior and disciplinary responses. These changes before you align with the changes before you in the policy align with the changes that were made to the student rights and responsibilities both in the spring of 2016 and 2017. And as you recall, over the course of the past 2 years, under the board's guidance, the SRNR has shifted from a strict compliance document to one that speaks of the aspirations and values of Seattle Public Schools. In addition to the changes that were made, we also worked in collaboration with several community stakeholders in the past 4 months. Ongoing meetings were held with the Equity and Race Advisory Committee to the Superintendent, as well as the Disproportionality and Discipline Committee. As we were putting the final pieces together, we also reached out to Dr. Abe, who, due to his work over the past year with school leaders, with the Race and Equity Department, and also with various schools within the district, we wanted his insight as well. We were able to, upon his recommendation, add in the moratorium that was passed in 2015, so the school board resolution number 2014-15-35, which eliminated out-of-school suspensions at the elementary level for disruptive conduct, disobedience, and rule breaking. We also reached out to the Special Education PTSA and the Seattle PTSA. Conversations were had with Sabrina Burr and Amijah Smith from the Seattle PTSA, not only about this policy, but also about concerns that arose from the Basic Rules flyer that was distributed to our schools and our families this year. The words in this policy are truly from our community. I want to express my sincere appreciation for everyone's time, effort, and dedication on this policy. I have no doubt that the final product is stronger because of them. In addition, the board action report also repeals policy D82, which is intervention for violent exceptional misconduct prior to readmittance to regular schools, because the language in it is either out of date or is already captured within the student rights and responsibilities.
Are there any questions or comments about this item? All right, thank you. Oh, excuse us, there's one more. Just one
Sorry,
question.
thank you so much for this work. As we talked about in committee, I very much appreciate that we're taking an aspirational approach, and we just need to make sure that as our work hits the ground, we're taking the extra time, as we talked about, to make sure that our messages aren't being undone inadvertently through how it's being, when it actually comes face to face with our public. So we'll watch out for that in the future so that all of our hard work is received as it was intended. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 3, Community Care Contract, RFQ 02758. Do we have somebody from the Audit and Finance Committee here to speak to this? Stefan?
Yeah. This was heard by the Audit and Finance Committee on November the 6th. Move forward for consideration.
Okay. And does anybody remember why it was moved forward just for consideration? Was anything missing, or was something going to be resolved? Don't know.
So, hi, Wyatt Jesse, Chief of Student Support Services, and we are moving for introduction and hopefully approval specific to a contracting with Community Cares. This particular staffing firm helps us with behavioral aids and supports to meet the needs of students. The service is listed literally on students' IEPs. Some of these students have different needs that are outside of the school day. Some students receive, for example, supports in their own home. And so these kind of firms help us get staffing that can assist us with, again, meeting the needs of the students and their IEPs. Came to our attention that we were going to exceed $250,000 limit, and so we wanted to bring that to your attention up front, knowing at the particular trajectory that we're headed. And then the reason why Community Cares was chosen was through the RFQ process that we have in place through our selection of specific vendors.
May I ask why this went to Audit and Finance instead of Curriculum and Instruction?
Timing. It was the timing.
Timing?
It was just one of those things where it came to our attention, and we wanted to bring it as fast as possible. Didn't want to delay that, so that was the reason why.
Okay, but this is more of an instruction.
Yep. We had just
item?
missed the CNI cycle, and so the reason it was brought there. It is around a contract and exceeding the $250,000 limit.
Okay. Right. And is this a new contract?
I like that question. So vendors, some of these vendors are small. Sometimes they change their name. It's just like one of those fluid things. You've seen me over the years. We have different vendors come and go, and this is one of the ones that we had worked with last year. So and moving this year, but it is a newer firm. Yes.
Okay, so we worked with them in the past under the same name.
Definitely, again, more recent firm.
More recent one. Okay. Oh, Director Patu.
Do we have any data on, since they've been with us for a while, in terms of what progress they've made with our students?
Oh, this is, I like that question. Also, this is just the staffing. They just do staff. We have a hard time staffing some of these positions.
Oh,
And so this is one of the firms that helps us staff these kind of aides. Again, these are kids that are at home, might have significant anxiety. So we're just strictly out meeting the needs of students and their IEPs. And so we do monitor, obviously, the progress of students on their goals, on their IEPs. And so these are the folks who help fill that need. We also do that. We do contracting for other positions like ESA staff when they're hard to fill. And behavioral supports is, again, one of our hardest positions to fill, whether that is with vendors or if that's strictly with SPSS staff and also IAs, as you know.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Next item, item number 4, City of Seattle Families and Education Levy Funding for Seattle Public Schools for middle school, out-of-school program transportation, Northgate Elementary Transportation, and middle school athletics. This also came to Audit and Finance. I guess that's you again, Stefan.
Audit and Finance on November the 6th and was moved forward for consideration.
And Stefan, do you know why it was only consideration?
I do not. I do
Okay.
not remember.
Okay.
Normally
Michael Stone, Director of Grants. I think I can answer some of those questions. One of it was some attachments that were on the contract that were regarding sample invoices that the city would like for this funding, and it was 2014 data. So they were wondering why it was 2014 data.
Yep. Jolyn Berge, Assistant Superintendent for Finance. That's the only reason it was for consideration, is there was a follow-up question from Director Burke, and those invoices had been included as examples, and they had an old date on them, so he wanted that followed up on. Otherwise, it's something that we've done for many years.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments about this item? Director Patu?
So this grant actually, I mean, is this something that the city has agreed to give us, or it's just an overall?
This is actually normally part of the spring Family and Education Levy funding that comes forward. They did not get us a letter of intent when we brought that other funding forward. The contract showed up and we went, oh, we're getting the funding this year. So we're bringing it forward to you now, but it's normally included with the initial Family and Education Levy funding that comes through in the spring.
Oh, okay.
So it's not something new, it's been ongoing.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And is this, one more, this is just a renewal of something that we already
It's a
do?
renewal
It
of something
just
that's
somehow got split from the usual
It got
cycle?
split. There was a letter, we did not receive a letter of intent from them, and we've now corrected that from now on, there will be a letter of intent that we receive in the spring with all of our other letters of intent of funding. But this does open up opportunities for our middle school students to participate in sports activities. One question that Director Harris had was, is it open to all students? Yes, it is. So this provides activities for our middle schoolers and provides summer school transportation.
Okay. And one question that I had asked, and if you could just answer it, for the record, would be helpful, was here's the Family and Education Levy providing some transportation funding, and earlier in the year when we asked if they could cover our two-tier buses, we were told that no, the Family and Education Levy cannot be used for transportation. Can you please clarify the distinction here?
This is specifically covering extracurricular activities that are happening at family and education funded buildings, whereas the funding we were asking for was for across the district. So this is specifically for opportunities for enrichment for those buildings that are funded by Family and Education Levy.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have one more
Yeah, Director Patu.
So is this an ongoing list that we've been getting from the city
Yes,
on an ongoing basis?
we've been getting it since 2013, yes.
So even if we added something on, asking city for something else, that still wouldn't change this list, would it?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item, item 5, BTA 4, approve phase 1 purchase of classroom technology to support teaching and learning. Let's see, this and the next one came to the Curriculum and Instruction Committee. Yeah, Jill, why don't you tackle that one? Next two.
These came to Curriculum and Instruction on November 7th, and were both passed through for consideration.
Thank you.
Good evening, John Kroll, Chief Information Officer. I want to introduce the item. It is for 80 computer carts, 1,280 computers, and it will be funded with voter-approved BTA 4 funds.
Thank you. And as, Kyle Kenoshta, Chief of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. And as John pointed out earlier, one of the things that we're working to do is anytime a technology measure is brought up, that we also emphasize the teaching and learning side. So one of the things I wanted to explain is that in this particular pilot, which is, again, a pilot, a relatively small purchase of laptops, that the problem that it is actually addressing, as per, Dr. Blanford's idea, that in many cases, like classrooms all over the region, as well as all over the field, really, that teachers are creating more interactive experiences, more collaborative experiences, which would be, in terms of the learning, be really accelerated or amplified if teachers possessed technology tools. And, some of the examples are things like projects that involve interactive writing, where students actually create products together, or where they have practice or research skills and access information globally, data analysis, things like, developing products that actually communicate and educate others, and things like that. Basically, the idea here is that in many cases in Seattle classrooms, teachers don't possess the technology in order to do these things, or the technology that they do possess is aging out into obsolescence, or is, in the case of desktops, quite immobile and doesn't allow the kind of instruction that teachers would want to do. So basically, our theory of action in this regard, in this pilot, is to provide the ability to teachers who are actually already on the way in terms of developing these types of projects to prioritize, the acquisition of these computers, first of all. Second of all, in cases where there is, a curriculum material in which technology can accelerate and amplify deep student learning, they would also receive priority in order to enable those kinds of experiences to happen. And as well, we'd prioritize need with an equity lens. And so by prioritizing allocation of the pilot in this way, we believe that technology can make a difference in terms of helping students meet standards and achievement goals. Rather than have me explain this, we actually brought both a principal and a teacher, in this case, Principal Chris Carter of Mercer International, as well as Emily Delowski, a science teacher. And if they could come up and maybe explain a little more about how this works.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here today. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak with you. I am a proud principal at ASA Mercer International Middle School. I've been there for 12 years, 6 years as a teacher years ago, and then most recently 6 years as a current principal. My piece of this presentation really has 3 key points, and all points are made in the spirit of strong advocacy for the urgency of tools to support teachers and to support students and their long-term vision around technology in schools to support instruction. My first point is currently our students, we do not have enough technology in our school to allow for access and opportunity for all students. As critical instructional tools for teachers in the service of preparing for students for their future, we are under-resourced. At Mercer, we're approximately 70% free reduced lunch. We have approximately half of our families that do not speak English as a first language. Our families rely on us to provide access and opportunities for kids to get 21st century learning and develop digital literacy skills. In terms of technology, the Seattle community obviously is a world leader, yet in schools, from a practical standpoint, our systems don't match. And one example, which is a little humorous, but reality, just this year, we stopped using chalkboards in our classroom and have some whiteboards, which is fantastic. I say that jokingly, but it is our reality. Another example takes me to my second point, is that we at Mercer, just in terms of a data point, about 30%, a little over 30% of our students are in academic enrichment classes or intervention classes to get kids up to speed. As students enter Mercer, in math as an example, they come to us, the last 4-year average is at 40%. 44% of our students meet in standard. They leave Mercer, over 70% of students meeting standard. So it's about a 30% gain in achievement, which sets kids up for success long term. The net result of that is, in order to provide that level of access and resource and support and prioritizing these students, it takes, there's over 350 students in these classes. That requires technology to support that. And by so doing, it takes technology away from other classes that can also provide digital literacy skills for students. So a bit of a school-based decision, but we have to prioritize high needs of students. My colleague here, a teacher, Emily Lasky, is going to share a little bit about what that can look like in terms of engagement and levels of depth of learning and teaching using technology in science, more specifically. But my third point is just, technology is an ongoing priority. Like textbooks, technology wears out and needs to be renewed. I submitted an email to Board Director Patu some weeks ago that really detailed out some of our challenges that are incredibly urgent here. And I'll speak on behalf of Mercer, but I know I'm not unique, or we're not unique, in terms of technology needs in schools. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ellie to share what that can look like in a science classroom.
Hi, I'm Emily Lasky. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher in EA Science. I have a Master's in Teaching, Master's in Biology, CTE Certified, a Content Demonstration Teacher, and this is my 10th year teaching 8th grade science at Asa Mercer International Middle School. I strongly believe in equitable and excellent science for all of our students, and one of the ways we make that possible is by increasing access to technology. Our current science materials were out of date when I started teaching, and they were never complete. Giving us technology allows us to keep up to date with current science. All of our middle school science teachers are involved in a project with UW, helping develop new science materials connected to the new state standards, the NGSS standards. 16 of those middle schools applied for a waiver and a tech grant in order to get computers, technology in our classroom so that we could run a technology-based program. And we're currently waiting for those computers. So I want to give you just a little bit of sample of what we're doing in science so you can see how very active, interactive, and engaging adding technology can be. So one of the benefits of technology is allowing students to try out a variety of authentic science. Students are introduced to different types of scientists, such as physicists, geneticists, and we get computer simulations that mimic what scientists in the field are working with. Along the way, students are involved in all of the NGSS practices. They're developing models, they're arguing with evidence, and using technology allows students to experience things that are too big, too small, too expensive, too complex to have in the classroom. So I'm going to show you just some samples of what using technology in the classroom can look like. So in this unit, students are investigating forces in motion, and this is a modeling tool where students are able to show what they understand about the forces in a collision. And so they're able to move things around and show what it looks like. Then they discuss with their partner, they hear different ideas. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the website to work, so I can't move things around for you. Sorry, it's a static picture. And then it's a check-in for me where I can see which students are maintaining any misconceptions, and we can have a whole class discussion about it. Then, you know, there are things that we do that are similar without technology, where they do hands-on activities, but then they get to collect their data like a real scientist, where they're typing it in, they're analyzing it, they're making it into graphs and working with that data and really being able to analyze it. And then the great part about using technology is students can do computer simulations, right? And so computer simulations allow them to ask questions and find answers, right? So after they've done this modeling, they have their prediction, then they can actually run it in a sim. They have things crash together, they see the results, they look at the forces, and they can analyze all of that data. And so they can build their understanding of science by moving things around. Then how this moves on, right? So they're once they understand how things work, right, how forces in motion work, then they're able to see how science can help people and make the world a better place by taking their understanding and doing an engineering project. So in this unit, for example, students are involved in the iterative process to develop supply pods that can be delivered after a natural disaster, right? It's really relevant for our kids, especially with all the hurricanes that happened recently, thinking about how we can help our communities. And so with technology, they're able to design and test and build and analyze and do that over and over and over again in a way that's not possible with physical materials. And so they get that experience. I'm going to share a little anecdote of one of my students this year. Started the year, she was really disappointed. She viewed herself as a biologist, and we started with a physics unit. And she was, you know, oh, I have to do physics, but I really like biology. By the end of this unit, she went home and told her family, I think I want to be an engineer. I really like the iterative process of doing all these tests and finding the best possible solution and convincing people my solution is the best and this is going to help so many people, right? And so having access to all this technology changed her mind from I only like this type of science to I'm open to so many more possibilities. So, thank you.
Director Pinkham.
Thank you for bringing this forward. And I recall at the University of Washington, we had actually something similar where they're talking about bringing in computer carts into the institution and helping us out so that more students had access to technology. But one of the issues we ran into is that these computer carts required a big power source. So they would sit someplace where they'd be plugged in, and all the laptops that were in the computer cart were charged and ready to go, and we did not have the space for that. Are we sure that we're going to have space in the schools, and the schools are going to be capable to handle these carts that may be in there? And
let's hear from the
So one of the cool things about carts currently is they have a rotating charging system, and so they're only like charging a few of the laptops at a time. And so we have some of these already in our classrooms, and we seem to be able to maintain it.
so were schools selected based upon were they able to handle the power requirements, or were there any schools didn't get one because they didn't have the power grid to handle these? Because again, that was the issue that came up for us at the University of Washington. We didn't have the space to, maybe because they're less power consuming now, so that's probably not an issue. I just want to see if that is.
Yeah, just what you said there is the carts now draw less power and the computers draw less power. As you've noticed, probably newer laptops, the batteries last a lot longer. They're a lot more efficient. And then also moving to mobile technology, we're removing some of the tables in the classrooms that heretofore had the desktop computers. So there's built-in room for the cart.
And sorry, a few more questions. How adaptable will these new technology be as, again, technology changes? How long, what's the life cycle do you predict for these computer carts? So that, and then next, so as you're on training for instructors, what's the impact for that? What do new instructors have to learn about these new technology? And hopefully this won't replace hands-on. Yes, it helps them redo things, but hopefully we can still keep the hands-on going. And ADA compliance issues if that needs to be addressed.
I forgot the first question already.
It's late.
How adaptable will these be to new technology?
Yep. We're planning on a minimum of a 4-year life cycle, and the laptops we are developing a standard where we're able to support those centrally and push upgrades from central. So I don't see an issue there. ADA compatibility, all of our software goes through a process for that. So anything, both websites and the actual software, if it's installed, goes through our ADA process as well as our security, privacy processes. Did I get everything?
Yes, and I answered my other question.
Okay.
Dr. Patu?
I just want to say that I saw those carts at some of the schools, and they're very convenient. I noticed that the computers are plugged into those carts, and the students actually get to go right into those carts and just pull them right out, and then when they're done, they go right back in there. So they are very convenient, and the students seem to know exactly what to do with those.
Dr. Blanford?
I'm taking off my school board director hat and putting on my hat as a parent, and giving a huge shout out to Ms. Lasky for all the work that she does in that school. I have benefit as a parent and have seen the great things that have happened and the energy that's generated from being able to do those types of experiments and come back and share at the dinner table with family what learning had occurred and the level of excitement that comes from that, and occasionally the desire to change careers and maybe become a scientist in addition to the first African-American president and all the rest. So I know that it is having a huge impact on schools. And the other point that I'll make that if my fellow board members have not had the experience yet, they surely will, where they will encounter a constituent who's been in our classrooms and talks about the state of technology in our classrooms and is just appalled that we are not cutting edge in a city that leads the nation and the world in terms of technology and its use and its application and its creation. And that's a hard conversation to have with people about why is it that we're not making the types of investments that are propelling their kids into jobs and careers in the 21st century. And so though I won't get a chance to vote on this particular one, I'm hoping that it will pass overwhelmingly and will allow us to move forward with some of the improvements that need to happen in our classrooms. So thank you for being here. And thank you, Mr. Carter, as well for all of your leadership. And we see frequently your school listed as one of our high-performing schools, and that's due in large measure to the leadership that you have insisted on and that has infused throughout the entire school. So thank you for being here as well.
Director Patu.
I just want to add to that. Had the opportunity also to visit Mercer and just had opportunity to watch the students at work in terms of their computers and what they're doing, and it's just amazing that kids know exactly what they're doing and the engagement that goes on in that school. There's not one time that I saw a student actually just played around, or sometimes kids get distracted. They were really into those computers, and so I definitely would like to see those computers and those carts go down to Mercer. Great job.
I have a couple of questions. What role does the hands-on part of education or learning play in this scenario?
So with science, we do a lot of where we do a hands-on and we model in the sim, and so it's kind of alternating. So we're looking at getting that tactile, moving things around, doing experiments, and then also looking at things that we can't necessarily capture in the classroom in the sims. And so there's very rarely a day where students spend the entire time on the computer. It's more of a support of the overall learning in a different way and keeping the materials up to date.
Okay.
Yeah, my piece isn't maybe so much about the hands-on in terms of as it applies to the scientific action. However, in terms of the enrichment action for like math support or reading support, we're able to, our teachers are able to sit side by side with students, watch their mathematics, watch their misconceptions, give immediate feedback, and give feedback to families as well what next steps look like. And that can't necessarily happen that effectively and efficiently without the support of technology. The part I want to also emphasize with this is just the urgency with which we need carts and how they're applied across the school. So we use them in multiple ways. So the mobility of the carts allow us to shift carts out of the classroom. We have a very complex schedule. I could definitely share it with you if you're interested. But we are able to pull carts out of the classroom and move carts around throughout the day. So you will see carts shifting and moving to support instruction. And because of the sheer number of students that we're accelerating in terms of their math and reading skills, classes like social studies and language arts don't get access to the technology because we have to prioritize the students that need more support in math and reading and science. And last point on this piece is Mercer has invested supplemental dollars, performance pay from the city, baseline dollars to purchase our own carts. And we cannot continue to support programs and continue to purchase carts on our own without district support. So there's an urgency behind for us to get carts allocated and purchased.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple points that I just want everyone to be cognizant of, and I think these perhaps points we brought up before, but I think we have to make sure that we keep a balance with how we use technology. Technology should never replace human interaction. It should not completely replace hands-on. I mean, I have, just in my own family, I have a child who's he's got lots of engineering prowess, and I see the value of what it's like to work with actual raw materials, construct something. Nothing really, you don't really learn physics like having something fall on your foot, I mean, and that's not going to happen with just the conceptual understanding we have with technology. And so it would be good to know to what extent we balance out the use of technology as tools. And another issue is, as parents, we're very concerned about screen time. And when I hear people say, oh, the students love the screens, well, yes, I know that. And that's the problem. And so I think as a district, we have to be very mindful of using the screens in a way that is constructive. And then when we see the use of personalized learning, one of my biggest fears as a parent is personalized learning could end up being abandoned learning, where the child is over there in the corner with the computer and you don't really know what they're doing, and if they have two windows open, one's educational and one isn't. You know, so there's a lot of areas where we just have to be vigilant and focused on how we use these things. And so I just hope these considerations are part of the conversation about all of this and a part of the construct of the curriculum.
Yes. It's true in the area of instructional technology. There are lots of different processes and practices. I think our bias is, the type of project work in which people, students are working collaboratively with other students as well as the teacher. We are not so fond necessarily of just sitting a student in front of a computer and having the computer be a teacher. We think that teachers are really good at engineering those kinds of experiences whereby students can actually interact with not only the technology, but with each other. And as well, I think at least from the teaching and learning side, we think that there is really a broad definition of technology. We think that, for example, print media is not something that necessarily becomes obsolete. And, we believe that students should be able to, learn how to get information from all sorts of media, including the textbook and other kind of printed material. But we do want them to be very capable at getting information from technology as well.
Okay.
I want to address two of your points. One, we are definitely making sure that we balance the hands-on versus the computer sims. And the second one, there are a few different versions of the technology, but there's a way that you have all of the laptops in the room attached to the teacher computer, and then the teacher can actually see the screens of everyone in their class, and then they know if anyone's using something that they shouldn't be, as to your concern of like having multiple tabs open, that aspect of it.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just finish with one other observation. There were some studies that came out a few years ago about the value of handwriting. People often say, do we even teach our kids cursive anymore? And what good is it? We just want them to have keyboarding skills. But there was some research that came out that actually said there's a value to handwriting, that there's some neurological connections that are made, and that students retain information better when they're handwriting it. So knowing that, I think we also have to keep an eye on what the research says about what's developmentally appropriate, and make sure that we're not getting caught up in things that ultimately might not be the best tools, or tools that we don't want to overuse.
That probably branches out into another area of instruction. I think that in our basically foundational instruction in K-3, although we may not get into the level of handwriting in the way that we used to, in which the practice was to get quite fancy about it, it is important to have an amount of automaticity in terms of being able to handwrite, such that the child doesn't have to really spend cognitive energy thinking about the actual task of putting print onto paper. So that's still definitely a foundational skill that we'll emphasize in early learning.
Yeah, and I just was using that as an example of where the hands-on connection to learning is still important. It's like the Montessori approach. There's some serious research behind that, and so I just wouldn't want to give up all of that, just for the technology solutions. Okay, thank you. I think I've lost my page here. Okay, the next item is, let's see. BTA 4, approved purchase of mobile computer devices for certificated staff. And I don't have my page in front of me. Oh, there it is. Okay. So that one probably came to
CNI.
CNI, and you might have already spoken to that.
Yes, I did. last
Okay,
time.
thank you.
John Kroll, Chief Information Officer. I'd like to introduce this item. This is for $5,500,000 to provide devices to every certificated staff member in the district. It would include not just the device, but also a docking station that would make it like a desktop for them, and the peripherals that they would need to use it to improve their teaching and students' learning. And with that, I will pass it again to my teaching and learning colleague, Dr. Kenosha.
Thank you. Having come from other districts in which it's been a standard practice to issue technology to teachers, there are a multitude of uses that teachers put to them that actually end up benefiting students. First of all, beyond the basic productivity that's involved in teachers using technology to just basically operate their classroom, the fact as more and more mobile technology gets into the classroom for students, these particular tools are pretty important so that the teachers can actually interact with students, on a pretty frequent basis. As well, the development of, instructional products that are flexible and actually kind of accommodate the really current needs of the students are made much easier by the fact that teachers have reliable technology. So there are multitudes of uses. One other one which we found that was actually quite beneficial is the fact that with teachers having consistent laptop technology that has some very good professional development uses in which teachers could in a professional development actually interact with the material and do some of the same things that students do in terms of co-creating things like units and lessons in real time, to where 3 to 5 teachers would actually be accessing the same document. So there are many, many uses for teacher technology as well that will end up benefiting students.
Are there any questions, comments about this item? Director Pinkham?
Yeah, just another with new technology and stuff, again, is going to be access to data. As teachers get these mobile computer devices, will they be able to download student data and store that on the computer itself, or are they going to be limited that they can only interact with the data? Because unfortunately, it's, again, my experience at the University of Washington, yes, we have all this data, and then when someone downloads it, it then becomes accessible to somebody else. So I just want to assure, are these going to be more like, what would we call them, not computers themselves, but more like monitors that they use to access other data, but nothing stored locally on them?
So I have 2 parts to my answer there. Is we are generally moving to applications where mostly the work is done on the screen and not downloaded, and we're working on training teachers, because kind of the older way to work was to have a desktop application and you worked in Microsoft Excel and you downloaded it. But we're trying to move more towards working within the web application. Since we're not 100% that way, we have an initiative that all of our laptops come encrypted. So any data that they do download is encrypted and cannot be accessed by other people.
Also point out that, the laptop technology will interact with the other types of technology that we're adopting, such as, for example, our databases, our data warehouses, in which the data is not on the laptop, but it is accessed, at the district level. And laptop technology will, allow teachers to become a lot more proficient in terms of how to use that and use it in real time.
Director Patu?
Is in comparison to the other schools, district, we are behind, because most other district with teachers that I talk to or staff, they all have computers that they, personal from the district that they actually take with them at work. And I think we're the only district that doesn't do that.
Yeah, I actually went around and looked at the technology plans of various districts. So 7 surrounding districts, for example, not only provide teacher technology at some grade levels, they provide one-on-one laptops. Other districts, have infusions of technology at both the student and teacher level. And I know everyone has their own anecdote about their own child, but my child graduated from Shoreline Schools in 2008, and she had, as well as her teacher, a one-on-one Macintosh laptop.
Okay. My only last comment on that would be, do the districts of similar size to Seattle also offer the same degree of technology? They do, okay.
Well, in actuality, in my examination, the districts come in all shapes and sizes. So you have some very small, ostensibly poor districts, such as the one that I actually came from, Marysville, which had issued Macintosh laptops 3 years ago to all their teachers, and then also had a Chromebook one-on-one initiative for all students from middle school on up.
Yeah, well, my point is perhaps it's easier to do that with smaller districts. I mean, everything we do has to be to scale, and that's one of our challenges. So, okay. Then if there's no further comments on this one, let's go on to the next item. And that is the approval of the student assignment transition plan for 2018-19. And there's also an amendment attached to that. May we hear from, let's see, Jill, if you could address, wow, there's a lot of ops. Oh, Stefan's here. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Stayed
You're our CNI person, right? Sorry, I'm just getting tired. Stefan, could you please
I'm the
address
ops chair, so.
the rest? There we go. The rest of.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
the rest of the list is all
being
ops.
sensitive to the time, I will note that this item and all future items were heard by the Ops Committee on November the 2nd and moved forward for consideration. I will note that this item was heard by the Ops Committee, then referred to the entire board, and then referred back to the Ops Committee, where we did not hear any concerns voiced the second time around, and we invited all board members to participate. So the amendments have not been vetted by the committee. On item, I was talking about many items, so on item 7, the committee heard it, went to the entire board, went back to the committee. We did not hear any concerns about amendments, and so this is all new for us as well.
Good evening. My name is Ashley Davies. I'm the Director of Enrollment Planning. So, as was mentioned, the student assignment plan for the 2018-19 school year was first brought to Operations Committee in the beginning of October for initial discussion, and then was brought to Operations Committee of the Whole at a special meeting October 25th, and many of the items were discussed there that are in the plan, as well as some additional things that we have changed or removed based off of the feedback that we got from the Committee of the Whole. Those updates were then provided on November 2nd back at Operations Committee, and so that's what I have here today to again review with all of the board for introduction. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to highlight the changes and differentiate whether they are changes from the October 25th meeting, the Committee of the Whole, when all of the board was there to discuss, and there forward. So the first of which, we had initially had a discussion talking about removing the transition label from the student assignment plan. That has been added back into the plan moving forward for board approval for the 2018-19 school year. So it reads the student assignment transition plan for 18-19. There was discussion about, for the 19-20 school year, having a larger comprehensive discussion utilizing also our race and equity analysis to look at how we could combine that with the 2009 document as well as the current transition plan. So that'll be work that our team as well as other departments will be engaging with our school leaders as well as community in the coming year. The next was an item that we had added to the transition plan that would remove the ability for students to transfer back to their attendance area school from an option school if there was not space available. And so based off the feedback from the meeting on the 25th Committee of the Whole, we took that out of what is going forward for board approval. So there is no change to the language that is referred in that document talking about the ability for families to transfer back. And again, the thought behind that initial recommended change in language was around ways to manage our capacity at attendance area schools that are overcrowded and option schools, as well as being able to maintain stability for those two. The next is in addition to the special education language. So this was based off of discussion that we had at the Operations Committee of the Whole, and there was specific ask to add language that talked about students who are at a link school, either an elementary school, and would then be in a middle school feeder that is not their attendance area middle. So the language added allows those families to be able to continue with the students who are in their linked school attendance area for middle school. So again, if a student is assigned to an attendance area elementary school that is not within their middle school feeder, they have the ability to continue within that middle school feeder with the cohort of students that they may have built relationships with. Since then, we've also had additional discussion around some special education language that refers to the school choice process and families with special needs being able to have access to option seats in the same way that our general education students do. And so that was a discussion that we had after, that we continued to have discussion after the Operations Committee meeting on November 2nd. So there is not red line language in the document that you have in front of you, but I do want to acknowledge that we are adding a piece that will essentially indicate that students who have, again, special education students will have access to choice seats through the open enrollment process, and there will be seats set aside. So we'll put that language in, we can send directly to the board so you know exactly what's going in. And if there's any other edits, we can make sure that that's refined before it would go for action.
Just before you move on, and then the middle school piece that you were just got done talking about, that we were going to do.
High school piece as well. Yes, sorry. Yep, and so the one other thing we're adding is also to the same extent for the middle school piece I mentioned, for students who are at a linked elementary who would then be in a different middle, also allowing them to continue into the high school that would be within their attendance area based off of their assignment at the elementary level. Great. Okay. The next piece is around clarifying space available as it applies to choice seats. So the document that was brought forward to the board on October 25th indicated in a footnote about what that meant in terms of seats available. And so first want to mention that the recommendation was to put it into the text of the document. So we've removed the reference from a footnote into the main body of the text. Again, that footnote was on page 3, and now it's in the main body of the text. And so the clarification, and that was based off of discussion that the district had in conjunction with the school board, as well as community throughout this past school year through the open enrollment process, as well as the wait lists and moves process, about wanting more clarity in terms of what seats available meant. So that is then defined there to say space availability depends on seats available given the staffing capacity at a school. So that language is still what was provided on the 25th in the Operations Committee of the Whole. The change from then is that it is no longer in a footnote, it's referenced in the body of the student assignment plan. So the next piece is the advanced learning pathways. So we had a tremendous amount of engagement that was going on separate and in conjunction with a lot of the work with the student assignment plan around pathways for not the 18-19 school year, but for the 19-20 school year. And so this was really driven by, and our addition of the language here is really driven by wanting to provide that information, that predictability for families earlier. We had talked about the high school boundary changes and being able to do them again before open enrollment for the 18-19 school year, knowing that it would impact families who were moving into high school, not only in the 1920 school year, but now, if we're talking about, again, 9th and 10th graders when Lincoln opens in 1920. So in that same way, we wanted to make indication of any advanced learning pathway changes at the high school level to align with the high school boundary changes, which is why there is indication in the student assignment plan for changes for the 1920. So the reference in there talks about the regional pathways. Again, this was mentioned in the November 2nd Operations Committee. It also referenced the fact that students would be grandfathered if they are within the pathway already at the high school level, and that includes students who would be entering in 9th grade in the 18-19 school year. So again, it would be any students currently in the pathway at the high school level, and then any students entering into the high school pathways next year would be grandfathered. And then the last advanced learning piece that we also have is around our advanced learners. And essentially, we have updated the information there and it's really just cleaning up the language, talking about the fact that opportunities for our advanced learners, which is formerly referenced as Spectrum, is available at all schools. And with that, if a student is at a school and with that designation, they would have that designation. We also updated the tiebreaker chart in the student assignment plan for the advanced learners, such that service area used to be the first tiebreaker, and we just removed that such that it aligns with all of the other tiebreakers. Again, our general education tiebreakers, our highly capable tiebreakers, and so that would just be, the first one would be sibling, and then it would be lottery. So that was the only one where we had service area aside from Montessori, and the Montessori is still the same.
I have a question. It says that Spectrum is offered at each school site. How exactly is that mandated, and what does that look like?
Hi again, Wyatt Jesse, Chief of Student Support Services. And so this is just a follow-up to some of the work that was done by RREA, Eric Anderson and his team. they had done a program review for advanced learning services. And so one of the things that I would really highlight here is while we do have those things about advanced learning for students, there are still some inconsistencies that do exist out there around, and it was called out by one of the parents. I heard the comment was around worksheets. I think sometimes the promotion of more is advancement, but actually it's the depth of knowledge that we're trying to instill, not only for our advanced learners, but all students. And that's what the research said, is that all students would be, obviously supported from that mechanism. There are things that many of the schools do. So there is either a walk to math model, or they do working groups within your class. So that's small group rotation of tables, mostly in the area of math, that gets advancement. And then LA skills are a lot easier to advance in because you often picks the text. The text is really a big deal for the students, and obviously the skill set gets attached to it, and that happens in most elementary classrooms across the district.
So are you saying that you could guarantee to families that Spectrum services will be offered at their student's school?
I could guarantee that we were providing advanced learning services as much as I can guarantee that we're providing any other guaranteed service that we provide, that we say we're going to give our students.
Well, that's what I'm worried about, because I had a similar question where we say, regarding special ed, we say resource level special ed are available at every school. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay. The problem with Spectrum is it's almost become a phantom. We've said elsewhere that some document that's been given to us that the Spectrum doesn't exist anymore. All right, so, and yet here we are assuring parents that they'll have Spectrum at every school and they shouldn't have to worry. But I've had parents come to me and say, you know what, if only my school would offer walk to math, but it doesn't, only the Spectrum school does, or only one school does. A parent recently wrote to the district because he wanted to move his child to the Spectrum school in the area. So there's still some going by that name, and there's this belief that some schools offer advanced learning and others do not. So there seems to be a disconnect between what we say we offer in the student assignment plan and how that actually plays out in our schools, or how parents perceive it. And so I'm not sure how to resolve this. I think we do hear from the community that just because the district says it's so doesn't mean it's real.
So that's the reality of the situation, and so that's why we wanted to make sure the language is there. There is no designated the services are provided at every single school, and so there's no self-contained Spectrum anymore at any of our schools. And the point that I think you're really illustrating, at least I think what I do hear here, Director Peters, is also the amount of information or misinformation that is currently existing out there. And that's something that we receive on an ongoing basis. And that's exactly some of the cleanup that I want to do within advanced learning services, is to say, hey, this has got to be a lot more about than the testing. It's got to be about the oversight of services across our schools. And so we do have to shift that work and the workload that's going on within a small team of folks with advanced learning, and put that back out there on the schools, is to make that shift out there, that we are ensured doing that advancement of services for students. And when I say that, again, that's the enhancement, that's the rigor that we talk about, that's the things that we do. We talk about honors at high school. What are the tasks that we're asking students to do? Are they project-based? Is the project related to what the students' interests are, which often fits what advanced learners want to do? And then also, what is the depth of the work and the cognitive load that we're asking students to partake in, and then we assess on?
Well, I honestly believe that if we did genuinely do this, if we did genuinely offer advanced learning at all our schools, we would have much more satisfied families, because just about everybody is asking for this, and people want general ed to be more meaningful as well. And so if we could make good on this, I think we'd have a lot more people happy with their schools, less interested in changing schools, and I also think we'd have less families signing up for HCC. Jill, did you?
This gets, for me, back to the review of the CSIPs and using them as a living tool and going back through and making sure that it is not rote language that is in there about what is offered for the advanced learners in a school. Because then that's the accountability piece that I think people are yearning for with regard to, have you really thought about it, or is it a worksheet? And then knowing that that school has done the work, that BLT has done the work to make a concept that they're willing to implement and live with, and then families will have some assurance.
So those are all the changes that are in the student assignment plan. I did want to reference, and I don't know if there's a protocol for talking about the amendment, but I did just want to talk about some of the timelines that come after this and talk about some of the sequence within this. So right now it's November 15th. And if this were to move forward, this would go to action on December 6th. On December 7th, I will be coming to the Operations Committee to present the high school boundary recommendation moving forward. And so I understand that there have been questions or concerns about wanting to pair the pathway information with the actual high school boundaries, but because of their dependency on each other, it does actually, from our perspective and from a planning perspective and from a Clarity for Families perspective, for us to be able to have that information before moving forward with a boundary change recommendation will allow us to be able to be more thorough in those recommendations, to be able to do the analysis, to be able to do the right sizing with the piece around the pathways for the current and future in mind when we present those. So the challenge with a delay in the pathways piece is that if there are questions or adjustments that need to be made, any adjustment with the pathways would then impact our boundary scenarios. And so, unfortunately, I couldn't stand up right in front of you and create a new scenario based off the questions that you may have. So that's why, again, Advanced Learning has done a tremendous amount of engagement around this work to come up with this recommendation to provide a more equitable service model across those advanced learning opportunities. And so in order for us to continue to move forward in service and support of creating clear, defined pathways and boundaries for all students involved, we would recommend that this continue to move forward such that we can do that boundary work with the clarity around the pathways. And then a few other pieces of next steps. So again, if this were to move forward for action, this would go for action on December 6th. And then December 7th would be the committee where we would bring forward the high school boundary recommendations. Then on January 3rd, we'd be coming for intro for the high school boundaries. And then on January 17th, that would be action for the high school boundaries. That leaves no time for kind of delay in between board meetings. That's essentially just the 2 weeks. We only have the one board meeting in December, so that gives us December 6th from the one board meeting to January 3rd. But then open enrollment begins February 5th, and we're looking at a choice fair on January 20th.
Director Blanford?
I think you introduced the concept of the amendment, but we haven't actually had the amendment introduced into the record. So it seems to me that now would be the time to actually do that. And I recognize fully that the two authors of the amendment neither are present right now, but.
Okay, well, I'll introduce it for the record. So we have an amendment to this item, and it says approval of this item would amend the student assignment transition plan for 2018-19 to delete assignment pathway changes scheduled for implementation in 2019-20 and combine them with high school boundary approval to be implemented in 2019-20. And Directors Burke and Harris are the authors of this amendment. I can speak to it somewhat because I've also heard that there's some concern about combining this with the student assignment plan, partly because this pertains to something that will not happen immediately, whereas the student assignment plan takes effect next year. And so there's concern about that sort of alignment and the belief that the conversation regarding high school pathways and HCC pathways needs to happen at the same time, that's a more organic combination of topics. And then I also know that there's concerns about the proposed HC pathways. I've been hearing from the community. I have my own concerns. I know Director Burke does as well. And so that, that could lead to another conversation. It could also lead to another amendment, frankly.
So in terms of the sequence of things, our high school boundaries actually don't go into effect until 1920 either, and so we first kind of began this work with the idea of wanting this information at least a year ahead, if not 2 years ahead for families. So that's why we began the high school boundary conversation much earlier than just 1 year ahead. And so because the HC pathways at the high school level go hand in hand with the boundary work, we've been discussing and engaging on the same timeline, which is why we've been doing the open house meetings, talking about the high school boundaries, as well as talking about potential student assignment plan changes, advanced learning changes. Again, we recognize the dependency between those two. That's why the discussion happens together. The piece that I was trying to articulate is that, again, to the extent that they are dependent, in order for us to create high school boundaries that are going to be sufficient for more than just a few years, we need to have baked into that analysis the pathway information, because that will influence the way we draw the boundaries. Based off of the pathways that are recommended, we are working to not only take into consideration feedback that we've gotten from a lot of the meetings. Some was shared here tonight about some of the transportation concerns. So we're using that feedback as well as any changes that need to be made based off of the projections with the HC pairings as we move forward with the boundary change. But again, for us to be able to do that in a thorough way and be able to communicate that in a thorough way, we need the HC pathway information decided on before then.
When is the appropriate time for directors to weigh in on the HC pathways and pairings that's been proposed?
So given that it would be in the student assignment plan that's in front of the board now, I imagine this would be a time where you could discuss those, because ultimately, if there are questions about that, we would want those addressed in order for you to approve next steps moving forward with those pathways.
Okay, well then I'll share some of the concerns that I've been hearing, as well as my own, and that is the proposal is being put forth, which is to basically have multiple pathways for HCC. Concerns me from a capacity standpoint and also from an academic standpoint. From a capacity standpoint, we're talking about students who might currently or otherwise be going to Garfield or Ingram would be sent to their neighborhood school And included in that are schools like Ballard and Roosevelt that are already incredibly full. And so this could have an impact at that level. You know, there's a sense that I'm hearing from people at that school saying, no, we don't need any more kids in our schools that are already full, and then families who feel that there's just not enough room there. And then the other thing that I have seen, and this is just from having been involved in the district for a number of years, I've seen the district take the HCC program and break it into pieces and put it in different places. And the goal of access and equity those are both good goals. But I don't know if we're totally accomplishing that, because here we are still talking about the inequity of the program. And so just putting it there doesn't necessarily make more students come into it. That's something else we need to do. There's some other barriers we need to address. And then we know from different task force studies and just things the district has determined in the past, in order to successfully offer something like HCC or even dual language immersion, you have to have a critical mass of students so that you can concentrate your resources and do it well. And if we break it into pieces, there's serious concern about whether or not we're going to have enough resources in each school to fully fulfill what each of those students needs. So this is another case where, sort of like Spectrum, just because we say it's there doesn't mean it's there. And just because we send students to a school or to a location and say the resources are going to be there, we have to put the resources there first before we send the students there. And I don't think that's what we have happening here with these HC pathways. So the solution that I would propose is to consider a north-south HCC pathway split, where the south end students go to Garfield, north end go to Ingram. And I also think that we should consider Lincoln for either HCC or dual language immersion or both. Those are the sorts of thoughts that I've been hearing that I think have some merit, and if now is the time to put them on the table, consider them placed. Jill, did you have something to say?
It's so late. It's so hard to have such a complex conversation. This doesn't seem the right way to go about it. But I appreciate the disbursement of the HCC program, and I appreciate that the placement of the program at Ballard and Roosevelt is because those schools, is my understanding, already offer sort of when you look at all of our schools and how many schools offer multiple AP offerings versus very, very few, they already have multiple AP offerings. And I think that those are the schools that are most likely to have kids in the highly capable cohort who decided to stay in their neighborhood schools in them. And so by just allowing kids to stay in their neighborhoods and get the services, that would be a good thing. And for other kids and in neighborhoods where you have higher populations of kids of color and perhaps less affluent, the cultural bridge that we're asking them to cross to go into schools that are out of their neighborhoods seems to be answered by dispersing the program a little bit more as well, to me. I want us to keep in mind that unlike a lot of our other kids, once you get to high school, a highly capable student has the choice of going into Running Start. And for these truly, truly unique learners, they also have the Robinson Center at the UW. And so already, for those kids who really want a traditional high school experience, they can go to a traditional high school. For those who want college with a myriad of offerings, they can go to Running Start. And for those really uniquely exceptional kids, they can go into the UW. And that's not ideal, but it's a lot of offerings. And we have a lot of kids in our district who don't get much of any offerings. And I'm thinking of, you know, maybe a student, I hate to put them in a percentile, but a student who's maybe performing at the 89th percentile in things, and so is a smart kid, and their neighborhood school is Rainier Beach, and that's where they get to go. And what is the panoply of their options it doesn't look like much. They are not smart enough to gain access to all these other things. They're, you know, they're performing well, and so they don't necessarily get a lot of special supports either. They're just middle of the road, and they got one option, and that's it. And so I think it is our responsibility to make sure that to the extent we're balancing the options that are available to address the needs of our students, that we're being fair, just plain fair. And so I see this as a movement towards fairness.
Yeah, I just want to say, in defense of Rainier Beach, they've got the IB program there. It's not chopped liver, and you know, there's some good things. I mean, really good things happening at Rainier Beach. The graduation rate is going up, and what they've done with the IB program is very interesting. They make sure every student participates in it. So I think Rainier Beach is actually a good example of us doing something really well. So
And,
you know,
and with the IB program, then that's a unique offering that could actually allow the deeper learning that any kid would benefit from with the theory of knowledge, those classes. So again, making sure that we have multiple options for every student throughout the district is important.
Okay, so Director Blanford, and then we actually have to take a break, unfortunately, in a few minutes to change the tape. Speaking of technology and our lack of. Dr. Blanford.
So I'll try to be brief with these comments. Director Geary started off with concerns about the process, and I will elaborate on that and share that I have a very bad taste in my mouth as a result of the amendment that's been put forward. Ms. Davies shared at the beginning the fact that this motion has had numerous looks and data that has been provided to us and changes that we've made. Originally, we were planning to vote on this particular item on this evening, and the entire committee or the board decided that they would refer it back to the operations committee. We had an operations committee the following day. We looked at the proposal. We offered the opportunity for any board member to give advice or thoughts about how changes could be made. Didn't hear any substantive ones, and so we moved this forward. And as the director who is the chair of the ops committee, where this should have been vetted, I discovered an email at noon today that was sent at 10:23 this morning, notifying me that there was an amendment that was being put in place. All of that to say, this is not the way to run an effective organization where we're making decisions that will have huge impacts on children's lives. There has to be sufficient time for board members to look at and consider. There has to be additional time for staff members to vet these ideas and share their thoughts and share some of the unintended consequences of moving forward. And this is a classic example of us not doing that. And as Ms. Davies has shared, there are unintended consequences with the amendment that I think will have long-term implications, particularly as we're talking about predictability and some of the higher ideals that we've set for our behavior. If this has a severe impact on our ability to tell our families that your student will go to school X or school Y, then particularly in pursuit of maintaining access for those who already have it to the detriment of those who don't have access to HCC, then I think we're doing a huge disservice to our families and making a mockery of the idea that we're about equity.
As somebody who's having to speak for the amendment tonight, I want to say that they introduced it today a full 3 or 4 weeks before we're actually going to vote on it. So that's plenty of advance notice. And we all reserve the right to introduce amendments, even from the floor. So, you know, I don't believe that the sponsors of this amendment have done anything inappropriate. And in fact, they put a lot of thought into this, and we have heard from the community about this issue, and they're addressing that. And everybody has the right to vote against the amendment. So we are at a point where we have to take a technical break. So I'll say, let's make it 5 minutes and come back and continue. We're still talking about the student assignment plan, but maybe we're near the point where we can move on to the, I mean, I don't know, do we feel like we're ready to move on from the student assignment plan at this point, or should we come back to it? Ready to move on? Let these people go home? Okay, that's it for the student assignment plan tonight, folks, to be continued. There was nothing to vote on tonight, please. It was just introduction, so, and then we'll come back to item 8 when we come back from our break. Thank you.